The Bullseye Cat. Written by Indigo's Abyss. Summary. Bullseye worked alone. He was not a personable type. He took orders, killed and hurt whoever he was told to, then took the money and left. As little human contact as possible. So when reports of an apprentice shadowing him arose, questions were asked. The kid was nothing Bullseye would normally associate with. Pink and loud and unsubtle, cowed only by the threat of Bullseye's knives. Why was she even there? Because Gwenpool knew secrets. Every secret he could think of, and when someone can stop Spider-Man with only a single whispered word, you want them by your side, no matter how much force is needed to keep them there. Chapter 2. The Jersey Witness Killing. A chapter summary. Gwen continues working for Bullseye. Tension rises as their contract takes them to Jersey City, the stomping grounds of one Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel. There was a small garden that came with the apartment. God knew what Bullseye intended to do with it, but for now, it was Gwen's territory. A small faded red dot had been painted on the wall of the building, and that was the reason she came out there at all. She clutched a baseball in her fist, took a step back, lined it up with the target, threw it. It landed a smidge to the right and glanced off the wall, leaving not a single mark. Nothing close to the wall-breaking feat of Lester the Child, but it was good progress considering that she had only been doing this for 3 weeks now. "What are you doing?" Bullseye asked, appearing behind her and nearly making her jump out of her skin. "Thought I'd take a page out of your book," she grinned widely. "This is how you started, right?" Reminding Lester of the info she had on him was her own subtle power play. "At least you're taking steps to improve your aim," Lester settled on. "Soon we will start you on the darts. For now, eat. We have a contract, and I will not have you falling behind." "Okay," she nodded, following him inside. There was Nahari and naan on the table that was still steaming hot. Gwen kept a bubble of space between them, even while loading her plate up with naan and Nahari. Bullseye pretended to not notice as he crossed his legs and began eating too. It was hard to be perpetually terrified of someone when you've seen them licking oil off your hands, but somehow Lester managed it. "So, you mentioned a mission?" she asked, playing with a piece of naan. Bullseye nodded. "One of my old FBI contacts has contacted me for a mission. What do you know about Jersey City's Marvel?" Oh, what didn't she know about Kamala? But it wasn't a good idea to go blabbing about her idol's secrets, so Gwen kept her mouth shut on that front. "Also, FBI contacts. Were they mixing in some of its television backstory for this?" "She's a child," she supplied instead. A single look from Bullseye told her that that wasn't an acceptable answer. "She's known to be stretchy, but you gotta be careful because she can also shrink and grow her whole body, even if she doesn't do it much. She could shapeshift, but she can't anymore because of her super healing or something. Electricity can be used to neutralize her powers, but she isn't bulletproof either." Bullseye nodded, hand on his chin as he took in this info. "Did someone call a hit on her?" she asked nervously. This didn't happen to younger heroes. No one was enough of a douche to just randomly order a hit on a child. Even if they came into contact with mercs, it was usually tangential, and not them outright targeting the place. "For whatever reason, no," Bullseye shook his head. "Our target is some witness to a criminal case in New Jersey, and there's a high chance that Miss Marvel will interfere. If she does, I need you to eliminate her." Gwen frowned, trying not to let her doubt bleed onto her face. "What's the problem, Poole?" he chuckled. "Don't tell me you're finally developing a moral compass." "Not with red shirts and grunts, I don't," she denied. "But it's different with the capes, especially someone as popular as Miss Marvel. No way they'd let Bullseye's apprentice kill her for such a vague reason. I doubt this is even happening in her own book, since you don't fit in with her style. We'll never get away with it." Silence. "If you have any other reason that this would work except for your delusions, say it plainly," Bullseye snapped. Gwen clutched her knees tighter. "Look, don't blame me if it doesn't work, is all I'm saying. Considering the fact you will be the one shooting at her, I will blame you." Bullseye glared at her. "We need to start treating your psychosis before you start sabotaging my contracts with your inane beliefs. Couldn't you have left enough trace of yourself to be able to go to the hospital?" "I keep telling you, I didn't wipe myself from the system. I came from another dimension," she corrected. "And aren't there any skeevy hospitals that'll do it off the books?" "They deal with gunshot wounds, not whatever you have," he waved dismissively. "Now, pack up your arsenal so we can go." Another pause as he took in Gwen's costume. "Also, please cover that with something that isn't going to raise alarm bells on the train." Gwen rolled her eyes, but put on a jacket and a pair of cargo pants over the costume. The mask remained firmly in place, however. Keeping the weapons unnoticed was more important than the costume, anyway. At every mission, she had a sniper rifle, a close-range handgun, a bazooka, and at least 20 grenades, complete with 3 clips of extra ammunition for all of them. Except the grenades, duh. All of this she had learned to compress within a single tiny pink backpack, using what was definitely not cartoon physics. No sirree, no cartoon physics here. Just plain skill and efficient space usage. No one would see them coming. Bullseye didn't need all the weaponry she did. Anything he could fit in his pockets would do the trick. Gwen was almost jealous of him. This case could potentially lead to the indictment of John Drenley, Jersey's biggest plasmatic weapons dealer, Lester explained to her, his mask tucked into his pocket and a trench coat covering his suit as they sat in the train. And this witness is the linchpin in their case. Shouldn't they be in witness protection or something? She asked. I mean, isn't it the whole point for them to not be assassinated to prevent them appearing in court? It isn't that dire yet, Bullseye shrugged. I said potentially. If they nail this Hodges distributor now, the police will have grounds to look into where he's getting the weapons, and that'll get Renly in hot water. It's all about the long game that won't happen, because we're nipping the problem in the bud now, and getting a more than reasonable sum for it, when not in cracked her neck. So, normal protocol. I stand guard and you wreak havoc inside? Well, you can't do much more than that, he clicked his tongue in disapproval, then added, I want you to deal with the police guard too. Keep them from calling back up. Stay on your guard and don't let any vigilantes get the better of you. Oh, Captain, my Captain, she replied dutifully. At some point, she had to duck into a gas station bathroom to ditch her civvies and readjust her mask so that her hair would stop getting into her mouth and eyes. But after that, she began casing the witness's home. This was the big city, so private homes were very unlikely. But he had a decently pricey penthouse all to himself. Ah, the squabbles of the elite. There were 2 police cars on the street, one directly in front of the building they were targeting, the other further up. They reminded her of the unwanted mantle she had been given by that corrupt cop. The getaway police car. It plunged her straight to another memory. A bank. Handcuffs. How about you hack your way to a terminal met by 2 old, undamaged, and unimpressed eyes? Don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it. Now, how do you go about this? She could cause a distraction, but she doubted these guys would hurry to a bodega robbery in progress, no matter how close the bodega was. So, go the simple way and knock them out. You got any knucka gas? She asked Bullseye, before you could start scaling the building. He rolled his eyes, but tossed her canister anyway. And a bottle of chloroform, too. This should be fun, seeing how you're pink and white and as stealthy as a parade, Bullseye scoffed. Aren't you the one who still can't find any trace of my existence? Gwen snapped back. Listen, just let the pink ghost ninja handle this. Bullseye pulled out his grappling knife and began to climb, leaving her to deal with the pigs. Killing was easy, as long as she didn't hang around to watch the bodies rot. But it was also loud, and would alert anyone in a 10-mile radius. It was easy to stick the canister into the car closest to the target and watch them drop like flies. The second one required more finesse. Gwen crawled up to the car and peered inside. Only one person inside, but the jacket on the passenger seat hinted at a second, who had gone on a walk or something. Seriously, dude, you had one job. But if it made Gwen's job easier, who was she to judge? She knocked on the door, a loud echoing clang that made the stealth instincts of Bullseye had beaten into her cringe. Whatever, this was freaking Jersey City. If anyone was bothered by a slamming car door, she'd eat her giant custom boot. The sound alerted the cop just fine, though. He stilled inside the car. Gwen readied her rag of chloroform and scraped the tip of a dart along the door, trying to provoke, but not to the point where he freaked out and holed up inside the car. It worked. The door opened. The man came out, brandishing his gun in front of him. Too bad for him, Gwen straightened up behind him and forced the gun away from him with her left hand, while her right covered his mouth and nose with the chloroform-sodden rag. He struggled wildly, the anesthetic not immediately knocking him out. He was a buff guy. No way Gwen could keep him subdued long enough for the chloroform to take effect. She snapped his neck and got it over with. Effortless, silent, easy. And the chloroform wasn't even needed. When the other cop came walking back around the corner, she jumped up from the corner and slit his throat. Screw the sedatives. She would have recorded her success to Bullseye, but the man didn't have a comm. Yet another reason why he wasn't fit for cooperating. All that was left for Gwen was to secure the penthouse, and then make sure no one attempted to interfere. The only reasonable exit was the elevator. Which was dumb, because what if there was a fire, or an earthquake? You really need to think these things through. And she snuck inside, and cut the cable to make sure no residents accidentally wandered into the crime scene. After that, there was nothing to do but wait. How long could it possibly take for Bullseye to kill one fucking person? A lot of time, apparently. Enough time for a flash of blue, red, and lightning bolts splayed across the chest to show up. Gwen got no warning. This giant fist that came out of nowhere. She dodged it clumsily, trying not to squeal. A real, true-to-life, embiggened fist! And she had almost got to touch it. This was the best day of her life. Hey, Miss Marvel, she grinned, looking around. What are you doing here? I stopped the police before they could radio it in. I keep a close eye on local politics, Kamala told her, a large arm darting back to her body as she emerged from the shadows. A fittingly dramatic entrance for the legendary cinnamon roll herself. Of course you do. You're incredible, Gwen beamed at her. Kamala did a double take. Thank you? She shook her head. No, forget that. Did you kill the 2 police officers? Oh, boy. Probably best to not admit to that outright if she wanted to stay on good terms. ACAB, right? She said instead. I once saw a cop take all the money some crooks grabbed from a bank robbery and then pocket all of it. Easily thousands of dollars. They're all trash. I don't agree with the cops all the time, Kamala agreed with a grimace. But that's not an excuse to murder them, you criminal! Even after what they did to Amir for simply walking down the street with a pressure cooker? Gwen challenged. Kamala froze. Gwen realized her slip up too late. I don't know any Amir. Kamala tried to deny faintly, the lie obvious in her ashy face. Why would I? What do you know? As fear morphed into rage, and Kamala started throwing fists, Gwen tried to do damage control. I won't tell anyone, I swear, she promised, dodging a punch. Your secret is safe with me, but I need you to get out of here. Why should I do that when I can get you arrested now? Because then he'll see you, Gwen warned. Who's he? Kamala frowned. This wasn't good. Bullseye was probably wrapping up by now. Shrink down, stay hidden, and pray he doesn't find you, Gwen hissed at her. Kamala looked like she was about to argue, but then one of the penthouse windows snapped open, and Bullseye started making his way down. Fortunately, Kamala decided to listen to her and shrank to a minuscule size. Bullseye landed on the ground beside her and looked around serenely. Gwen was sure she could get away with her misdemeanor. Hey, Poindexter, she grinned at him, saluting. Follow your orders to a T. You use chloroform on those two in the street corner? He asked, crouching down to get a better view. Those necks looked too jacked to be drugs. Yeah, no, broke their necks instead. Bullseye clicked his tongue. Sloppy. Probably left evidence all over their bodies. Don't see how that's your problem, Gwen replied, fidgeting with her hands. It was easier to lie to him when he wasn't looking at her. She might even get away with it. Maybe she had been too confident with her lying abilities. She wasn't expecting it when he turned around and threw a sharp rock at her knee with unerring accuracy. It immediately buckled, fiery hot pain erupting from her joint as she crashed on the ground. And an agonized scream pulled at her throat, but she kept her mouth shut. No loud sounds, or else the civilians in the area might be alerted. What the fuck was that for? She hissed instead. He pinned her down with a glare. Don't lie to me. I know Miss Marvel was here, and you let her go unharmed. Not by choice, she tried to protest. I told you that I couldn't hit her. She's just that good. Maybe I should put you back in with Cecil if you're not good enough to work beside me, Bullseye snapped back, his voice deadly serious. Gwen hadn't thought he would still have Cecil's corpse in that closet. The idea of it made her feel sick. Fine, I swear, she promised desperately. Next time I won't hesitate. Just please don't. She could feel his derision, but he shrugged anyways. One last chance then, Poole. Now, we need to get moving. Every time he shifted her leg, it felt like hot metal filings were deep inside her flesh, chewing away out. It hurt to move, it hurt to walk, it hurt with an intensity that made it difficult to think. But she dragged herself onwards without a protest. She was just glad that Kamala had walked out of that alive. Chapter 3. Where'd the plot armor go? See, most comic books would have a character walk off a leg injury, easy peasy. But she's not in a comic book, was she? Gwen had thought it would be alright. She was the main character, wasn't she? She could get a mangled knee and walk it off easily the next issue. But she was pretty sure it was the next issue now, and the pain still ebbed through her leg like a hot iron, becoming more and more intense every time she thought of a way to describe it. 2 weeks after her fateful run-in with Kamala Khan, and Gwen's knee still felt like it was on fire if she leaned on it too much. It was ugly, too. Despite the bandages and salve some merc medic had given her, the whole thing was swollen and violent, veins sticking out like vines in the mess. At some angles, the skin was raised at a sharp angle, and she could almost humor herself into thinking it was edges of bone fragments, waiting to burst out. The longer she stared at it, the more vivid it became, the more painful the hurt got, yet she couldn't rip her eyes away from it, like it was consuming her, demanding her attention. Go on an assassin mission, kill 2 policemen, engage a fictitious but still incredibly powerful superhero in a fight, and the only injury she got came from her benevolent mentor. Didn't that just figure? On the plus side, Bullseye didn't seem too interested in pushing her after her leg went down. Maybe he understood the limits of the human body after all. Not that the comics understood the limits of the human body. Oh, they'd insist that some character had perfectly human durability, and have them walk off injuries way worse than Gwen's. The only reason she'd even been willing to go superheroing without pants had been because she was certain that she would never get stabbed or scratched up. Too gory. Back in the real world, her father had once said that pain hurts less when you weren't focused on it. Whenever she had a tooth knocked loose, or a stomachache, or a wrist sprain, they would get out a puzzle or a game, and they would try to keep her mind off of it. Those were only meant to work for little things, not whatever had happened to her leg, but it was at least worth a shot, wasn't it? Hey, Lester, she spoke up, one day while the guy was helping himself to breakfast. You got anything to do? There was silence for a few seconds before something rustled and footsteps warned her of his approach. A pack of small marbles were thrust into her face. They shone with a metallic gleam, tinged with a layer of fine red powder. Metal shot for your practice, he explained. It was harder to read his face without the mask on. Gwen had simply gotten used to reading expressions when they were painted on distinctly patterned masks. Of course, when asked for distraction, the guy only had more training to offer. But it was better than nothing, and Gwen took him up on the offer. Her aim with the baseball had been getting better after all, which is why she was moving on to smaller projectiles. They were slippery in her hand, even without the powder. Metal shot was hard to hold, even trickier to throw. They were made for slingshots after all. But she lighted up carefully against her eye, angled her wrist just right, and flicked it. The metal sphere bounced off the wall, leaving a smudge directly on the target dot Gwen had painted. Bullseye. The joke didn't feel as funny as it would have been before. Her accuracy had improved drastically since being brought under Bullseye's tutelage, which was total bullshit, because he didn't even teach her or anything. She was doing all the work herself. Maybe it was simply being next to him, or the fact that Bullseye had a recognizable brand, and if she was supposed to be a sidekick, then the writers of whichever comic she was in must need her to fall in line with that brand, which implied that she wasn't the main character here, but instead a side character in a Bullseye comic, of all things. That was horrifying. She refused to let that be a possibility. But accuracy or no, she still lacked power, stamina, ability to hit objects that might be moving even the slightest. She gritted her teeth and hurled another shot at the wall. A slight crack stretched across the target. Finally, another advancement in her training goals. She noted, dimly, that once she had gotten her attention off of it, the pain in her leg had not just lessened, but completely vanished. And as soon as she had that thought and caught a glimpse of that bruised and battered joint, the pain came flooding back. Never mind then. That must have simply been a trick of the old nervous system. She wasn't making enough progress, not soon enough for Lester Poindexter standards. You're still limping, he noted. Has the doctor found you not been good enough? She handled as much of the damage as she could, Gwen replied, injured leg stretched out on a cardboard box. But it's never going to be the same again, even with time. You should have thought about that before you maimed your star protege. Bullseye clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction. We can't keep waiting around for you to be in top condition. I've already done a few contracts on my own, but you need all the experience you can get. Some workarounds must be put into place. You got any ideas? She asked, trying not to come off too rude. No need to provoke the guy after he'd already left her with permanent injury. Lester tilted his head consideringly. The place you got that hideous gear made, he suggested. Go there and ask for a knee brace, and pants, and decent under armor, and more functional holsters. All in all, just ask for a proper fucking outfit. Gwen rankled a bit at the criticism. Sure, this suit wasn't exactly what she had in mind when she'd gone to Big Ronnie's place, but it was her suit. She picked the colors and chose to have a mouthful and kept the katana holsters at the back, even though she didn't know the first thing about swords. It was all her. So what if she was lacking in a few key areas? Besides, you're making it sound like it's my shit taste that's responsible for this, she crossed her arms. But it wasn't. I couldn't afford the good stuff when I started out. Lester cracked a smile, a cruel, cold thing. You think that's still a problem? You're in the big leagues now, kid. He threw a stack of bills at her, which Gwen caught easily, and began flipping through. With a shit ton of money, easily more than she had ever held, even after the alien massacre spit out. What's this? She asked, instead of simply accepting the money. She knew better than that. Your cut of the assignments we've done, Lester explained. I suggest you use it to treat yourself to equipment that will stop you from dying. Wait, I'm being paid for this? Yes, why wouldn't you? Because you locked me in the closet with my dead best friend? Just go, Lester waved her out of the apartment. Finding Big Ronnie's store was a pain. Just a few months ago, Gwen had been making the trip to the costume maker's place of business every day, so the direction she had to take was basically ingrained into her head at that point. Except, the directions weren't the same. The trip wasn't starting from Cecil's apartment like always. Instead, Bullseye's apartment was across the city, and the route was totally different. But with the help of the privacy-breaching GPS in her phone, she found herself in front of the store once more, looking at the fold-out signboard with sketchy reviews on it from heroes who had probably never even heard of Ronnie. She took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the door handle. This was the simple part. Get in, get her new equipment, get out. Pay in the process. She could handle it just fine. What was so hard about talking to a red shirt? Before she could gather up her nerves, the door was already swinging open, pushed out by a leaving customer, a satisfied one, judging by the bag tucked under his arm. Gwen would have overlooked him for just any other vigilante hopeful if it wasn't for the red lenses in his gold-rimmed glasses. That made her freeze in her tracks. The guy also seemed to freeze a little. Ah, shit. She'd been spotted. Or sensed, at the very least. Matt Murdock didn't do much spotting, so to speak. Don't get her wrong, Daredevil was cool and all. The hot lawyer of the people shtick and super edgy world on fire thing always got to her, but they weren't exactly on good terms. In fact, knowing how to use his weaknesses had been what had drawn Bullseye to her in the first place. This was really all his fault, if we wanted to get technical about it. But he was in civilian form right now, and so was she. They couldn't start duking it out right now? Well, she could. She had no identity to maintain, but she did so not want to go viral as a teenager who fought a blind guy. They were stuck in an awkward standoff now. Someone was going to have to break the ice first, and given how she was 70% sure she was the main character, it might as well be her.
Hey, could you please move? She asked, trying to play the innocent bystander. I can't enter the shop. Oh, of course. Matt shook his head and quickly shuffled out of the way. Guess he was following her lead and staying out of her way. No way he was going to let this go, though. She was betting he was hovering around the corner, listening to everything that happened inside. Probably thought she was going to threaten the costumer or something. Well, joke's on you, Murdoch, but Ronnie was a friend. The costume store hadn't changed a bit, down to the scattered dossiers of costume plans and the coffee rings on the desk. Hey, Ronnie, Gwen sauntered up to the desk. Been a while, hasn't it? The woman stared at her, eyes bugged out in disbelief, as if she was staring at a ghost. Gwen, she gaped. You haven't been seen for months. Ronnie thought that you were dead. Well, I'm not, Gwen replied, discomfort staring in her gut. She wasn't the dead one. Why was everyone concerned about her? They should be mourning Cecil. And I need a costume upgrade, with pants this time, and maybe armor. Her leg twitched in pain. Anyway, you can incorporate a leg brace in there too? Gwen stared at her, eyebrows scrunched up. What happened to you, Gwen? She asked. Nothing, Gwen replied, slapping a large portion of the money she had been given. Will this be enough? Ronnie shuffled through the stack with trembling hands, still looking surprised. Where did you get the money? She asked. Have you been getting violent jobs from somewhere else? Doesn't matter, Gwen rolled her eyes. Can this pay for a high-quality suit? The way Ronnie's eyes shifted made it obvious that it wasn't enough. Not surprising, since lightweight protective fabrics could go up into the millions. Even Spider-Man had just decided to fuck it and take his chances with the bullets. But instead of rejection, Ronnie smiled wistfully at her. I'll scrounge up some resources, see what I can do. Would you mind having an Under Armour suit that doesn't match with your outer one? Sure, whatever. I don't care if it looks good, even. Gwen sighed, slumping onto the counter. She should be relaxed and loose. Careless, even. But the tension still wound through her muscles. She couldn't let her guard down, not even around Ronnie. You don't care? Ronnie choked out, barely tamping down her outrage. Fine, okay, this is fine. Ronnie has been stockpiling fabric in that unpopular shade of pink you like so much. It is thicker, though, less flexible in some places. Will that be all right? I'm not trying to be the next Spider-Man, she shrugged. As long as I can run, it'll be enough. Ronnie smiled, sad and soft. And I suppose your running has improved from last time? Nope, she chirped, giving a shit-eating grin. Ronnie laughed. All right, let's take your measurements, and I'll get started. She ushered Gwen to the back of the store, measuring tape in hand. She kept training, kept stretching her knee and working on recovering, kept oiling her guns and sharpening her knife, kept sparring with Lester, even down on one knee, kept standing in the yard throwing things at that faded target. All the while, the crack grew and grew. 2 weeks later, and using nearly 3/4 of the cut she had gotten from Bullseye, Gwen's new costume was prepared. Are you ready for this? Ronnie asked, handing her a garbage bag. Yeah, hit me with it, Gwen agreed, tapping her feet excitedly. New costume, new her. New her working for petty antagonist Bullseye. She suited up almost mechanically, not quite registering the zippers and clasps and holsters until the full costume was in place. Only then did she step out of the changing room and strike a pose in front of the full-length mirror. Hubba, hubba, she whistled, turning a little and flexing her arms to admire the suit. Now this is wicked cool. The most obvious change was the shoes. They were chunkier, with shock absorbers in the heels and knives on the sides, hidden suction cups in the soles too, and contained in knee-high pastel pink and white boots with acid yellow highlights. For the most part, the top looked pretty similar to the original. Same pastel pink sides with a thick stripe of white going down her middle. Gone was the onesie design, though, replaced with pink long shorts that stopped the handspan before her knees. Personally, she thought they were too long to be considered shorts like she had told Ronnie she wanted, but it was short enough that when she kicked up, the fabric would ride up, revealing black padding that glinted in the light with metal fibers. The same padding was in her boots and torso, too, filling out her form and protecting her from blows and stabbings. It made her look buffer, more obviously a threat, and while Gwen had liked the way her previous costume had made her look like the soft, huggable semi-adult she was, maybe this was for the best. Maybe people didn't know she was a breakable twig who could barely lift all the guns she carried around. It was a weakness she couldn't afford to have anymore. On her left leg, yellow cable stretched over her knee in an intricate pattern. It was tight, but instead of cutting off her blood supply or something, it numbed out the pain, stopping the leg from moving in a way that would make the pain worse. Because that was how braces worked. Do you like the color? Ronnie asked, hovering over her. Medical braces aren't common. Only yellow-themed heroes ask for them anymore. Give your boots some yellow so that it doesn't stick out as much. You think there's a correlation between vigilantes who like yellow and getting sprained legs? She joked, making experimental grabs at the holster on her back to test how easy it would be to grab a sword from there. She didn't have a sword, or how to use it, but she bet that the holster would come in handy if she ever decided to get one. At least, movement was easy, with how bulky and heavy all the protective padding was, and how stiff the rest of the fabric. She hadn't expected to be able to move her joints this much. Ronnie used her older, more stretchy fabric for the joints, Ronnie explained, grinning smugly. Didn't believe you when you said you didn't care. Then why did you bother asking for my opinion? Gwen rolled her eyes. Still, though, thanks. Wait, hold on a sec. She tilted her head from side to side, straining to hear a discrepancy. What? Ronnie asked, looking more alert. Something wrong with your ears? No, Gwen frowned. My hearing's great. I can hear just fine. While wearing this mask. Oh, Ronnie relaxed. Those are the spatial awareness speakers I put in the mask. Because I know you don't have any super hearing to make up for covering your ears with thick fabric. Gwen rotated her head, testing out all the background sounds, echoing in her head, completely unmuffled. This is useful, she nodded approvingly. Thanks, Ronnie. Always happy to help a violent mask in need, Ronnie smiled at her. Now, while we're here, you want to tell Ronnie where you've been? Discomfort curled in her gut, and she looked away. Well, I've thrown my lot in with Bullseye now. Ronnie gasped, bent clattering to the ground. Yeah, it doesn't feel good, Gwen agreed, wishing the ground would just swallow her up. Then why are you working with him? Ronnie asked, her eyes sharp and analytical. I know everything about everyone here, Gwen explained, and Bullseye isn't going to just let me walk away with that knowledge. Not after what happened with Daredevil. The gears were visibly whirring in her head as she posed her next question. Gwen, where's Cecil? I think you know. Gwen. 6 feet under the ground. If he was even given a burial, if not, he's in a closet, still rotting. Ronnie looked slightly green. Gwen felt like she was about to throw up too. You need to get out of there, Gwen, Ronnie told her. I can't. I don't have a civilian identity to fall back on, or any money. I can't even leave the Merc business, Gwen pointed out. He's going to find me, and it's not even a matter of if, just when. Ronnie deflated a little. Okay, I see your point. Just stay safe, keep me updated. I'm lucky that I got to meet you this once. Don't expect it again anytime soon, Gwen sighed. Ronnie's eyes softened. There was pity in her eye that chafed on Gwen. Anyways, I should go, she decided, pulling her sweatpants and hoodie up over the suit. Thanks for this. I've already paid full in advance, right? Yes, Ronnie agreed automatically, before frowning. Hold on. Ronnie has a gift for you. Gwen watched her reach behind the desk and pull out an egg. Excuse me? She blinked as the egg was forced into her hand. I mean, I'm honored, but what? Break it when you need help. It'll help you, but only once, Ronnie explained. Use it wisely, get help. It was a commendable effort, even if it wouldn't work. Gwen knew it wouldn't work. There was no way an egg would make it all fall apart, but she tucked it into one of her numerous pockets anyway, and smiled at Ronnie gratefully. Thanks. I better be going now. Ronnie, I need you to confirm once again, Matt repeated, trying not to grip the counter too tightly. The girl, she's being blackmailed? By Bullseye, yes, Ronnie agreed, a huff of air following her statement, giving away her exasperation. Shit, he swore, running a hand through his hair, trying to distract himself with the feeling of greasy strands. He really needed to take a shower soon. He couldn't help it, with the case he was working on at his day job, and his regular patrol business, not to mention the Pink Slayer situation. Pink Slayer. When someone had a name like that, you weren't expecting them to last long. Except this girl was different. The longer he investigated it, the more questions were raised. She had no background, no identity, not even a birth certificate. This was the kind of identity erasure that only the best hackers were capable of. Except 6 months ago, she had completely stopped hiding her identity. Didn't doctor any of the police reports which mentioned her, let herself get caught on camera all the time. According to Peter, who had called in to look at camera footage, something had happened to her to make her drop the act, and that wasn't even mentioning the fact that she knew the weaknesses of everyone around her. No, not just weaknesses. The girl's breathing was quick. Panicked. The way she moved made her seem uncertain and inexperienced as blows were exchanged between him and Bullseye. He almost brushed her off completely, only remembered her general position to make sure he didn't accidentally bump into her until it happened. Matt Murdoch, a whisper. Too quiet for anyone other than him to have heard. Maybe even the girl wasn't aware that she had spoken out loud, but it had still been spoken into existence. He had heard it. The girl knew his secret identity. He didn't know how or why. He had never even encountered her before in any form until they ran into each other at Ronnie's place. But she had known who he was. What else did she know? What else would she be willing to tell Bullseye? Maybe she's a friend of your Team Red buddy, Ronnie offered. Have you asked? Team Red isn't a thing, he told her sternly before continuing. And Spider-Man is working on the case already. I was talking about the Merc. What would Wade have to do with this? A sigh of heavy disappointment, hard enough to brush against his face. Because her name is Gwenpool? I'm sorry, her name is what? That made so much more sense than the Pink Slayer thing that had been going around in gossip circles. Also, he was going to kill Wade if this was a deranged cousin situation. Gwen blinked as she continued walking along the sidewalk. That was weird. She had been walking here, she knew it, but also she hadn't been? It all felt fuzzy, like she had just spawned here or something, even though she hadn't been. She had walked here, after leaving Ronnie's battle spandex. And where was here? Cecil's apartment. She crawled up the fire escape and walked in through the busted window. How had the landlord not dealt with this already? There was a smell coming from the closet, a smell that confirmed everything she needed to know. All right, she breathed, taking the egg out of her pocket. Here goes nothing. The soft, fragile shell gave way under calloused fingers, and instead of slimy yolk, fumes gushed out, letting her hand tighten around a card? 1825, it read, with no other explanation. Chapter 4. The Tabling of Turns. Gwen continues her tourist legendary Bullseye, now with a different spin on meetings she had in canon. Dead bodies were scattered over the floor, slumped over countertops and workspaces, as if they had dropped dead in the middle of work, without even a warning, because they didn't get one. Gwen had wiped them all out in one fell swoop. There were only 7 targets, so it wasn't hard to take them all out at the same time. What made her exceptionally proud were the traces she left. That is, there were none. Completely spotless, except for a single bullet wound, right in the head, for each one. She'd been double-wielding guns with silencers. They never saw her coming. She stepped out into the main part of the room, walking past the bodies and the brain matter, to instead make a beeline for the filing cabinet in the corner. Technically speaking, she could have gotten the info she needed without killing anyone, but that would have been way more of a hassle. Best to kill them all before someone pulled an alarm. That was one justification. The other was simply that she enjoyed it. The trigger on her finger and a splatter of blood. It was as cathartic as cussing kids out in COD, and there weren't even any consequences. These people had never even existed before she entered the room to kill them. They were basically created to be murdered. Wasn't that great? She could just keep going and pretend that every bullet she was firing was actually going into Lester's smug bastard face. Okay, she needed to chill. Work herself up too much, and she wouldn't be able to be normal around the guy after this. File obtained. A full list of the Cardinal Ring's mid-level dealers in her hands. 20 grand in her pocket. She tucked it into her penguin backpack, along with her guns, and walked back to the window she had gotten in from. Something crackled in the periphery of her awareness. Gwen swung around, staring at the groom crouched behind a trashed vending machine. He had a handgun clutched close to his chest, and stared up at Gwen in fear. The gun angled down, his fingers stretched over the trigger, her knife arced through the air, burying itself into his neck. She didn't give him the chance to shoot, and quickly moved to pull out the knife and wipe the gore off the blade before stuffing it back into its sheath. At least her aim was getting better. One quick sweep to make sure she hadn't left behind any witnesses, and she pulled herself out of the window. Her upper body strength had been getting better these days. Gwenpool lugging around an arsenal everywhere. Bullseye was waiting outside, tossing rocks from a roof. Dead pigeons scattered around him like fallen leaves. He turned around to look at her, head tilting back to take in all of her. Especially the flecks of blood on her boots, from where she had walked through the freshly culled drug runners. Wordlessly, he snatched the file from her hand and began looking through it. Good, he decided, putting the file down. A heavy hand came down on her head to ruffle her mask. You did well. Gwen wanted to snap his wrist. He was her only anchor to the main comics canon. She couldn't risk cutting ties with him. How else was she expected to make cameos in more popular series? So, she simply tucked her hands into her pockets, gave him a bright smile, and backed away subtly. A finger brushed against a sharp piece of glossy card. She pulled it out curiously. Yeah, the card from the egg, 1825. What does that mean? She had looked into it, but there weren't coordinates or Bible verses, or Quran or Torah, or any other easily Googleable holy text for the matter. And still, no cash. Just a random card spawned by an egg. Regular stuff. When they returned back to Lester's base, Gwen sequestered herself in her haven, while Bullseye wrote up reports and decompressed. It was always better to stay out of his way during this time, and my temper was shorter than ever. She reached for her phone on autopilot, flicking through the apps to click on. It was always a surprise whenever she made to reach for the unlimited app, and it wasn't there on her phone, replaced instead by a glitched-out icon that crashed her phone as she tried to click on it. Sometimes she almost forgot, until her fingers were just millimeters away from it, and she just narrowly avoided pressing it. She could sneak through the window and go into the garden to practice throwing more metal shots, but Lester had gotten mad at her for working his wall after she managed to knock a hole in it after hours of arduous tosses. You'd think the guy would have at least commended her on mastering his own trademark, but no, all she got was a backhanded bowl of plaster. Asshole. And she fixed that wall so good, you can even tell something had happened there. So Gwenpool 1, Bullseye 0. She had a routine, Gwen had learned, over months of careful observation. He liked to change it up sometimes to make her freak out, but she had an outline of what patterns he followed and was comfortable with after a mission. The client would be getting a visit soon, if her calculations were correct, and the remaining cash would be paid up. Then he would return and try to get the drop on her, just to lecture her about being aware of her surroundings. And when her fear no longer entertained him, he would move on to berating every minute action she took in the mission, all to remind her of how useless she really was, how stupid and weak and pathetic she was that fucking Bullseye of all people was considered her superior. The lock on the front door clanked shut. He was gone. and he would be back in an hour or more. Even with Bullseye gone, she didn't feel better. His presence haunted her through the entire building. She was never going to be free of him. She stared at her phone, the clock on the lock screen brightly informing her about it being 10:15. Gwen should get up and eat something. Who knows if Bullseye would try to restrict food as his newest little torment. She should shower too. Her muscles were stiff and painful, and the new suit was the opposite of breathable. In between two all-important needs, nourishment won out, and she headed towards the grimy excuse of a kitchenette. She'd never seen the guy use it, but she couldn't tell if it was because he couldn't, or if he wasn't willing to let his little protege, unwilling apprentice, mildly disgruntled kidnappee, they hadn't exactly decided what her deal was yet. Maybe he was just hoping she'd get Stockholm into spelling the names and identities of all the superheroes in the world for him. Theme in such a domestic state, but unused kitchenette or not, there was still a pack of instant ramen in one of his cupboards. She hummed along to a theme song that may or may not exist in this universe as she boiled up some water on the hot plate and reached for a knife to cut open the plastic container. Except when her hand meant nothing where she swore she had left it, she turned around to look, only to be met with a tall, bearded, strangely familiar guy wearing a badass floaty coat. Who was standing way too close to her. Whoa! She startled, backing away. Who are you? How'd you get in? Oh my fucking god, you're Stephen Strange! Obviously, you magicked yourself in. Why are you here? The Sorcerer Supreme listened to her airheaded rambling with mild amusement. You're my appointment on 6/25, right? He clarified. You used the coupon I gave Ronnie for Christmas? Oh, that's what that thing was. Hello, Gwen? It was a time! Her time with Bullseye might actually be making her dumber. Yes, she managed to say, once she had stopped screaming internally. Well then, Gwen, what can I do for you? He asked, eyes twinkling with curiosity. Now that I really proved that she was in the comics world, no one's eyes in her world ever twinkled. Or if they did, it wasn't obvious enough for her to read it. I'm not from this world, I'm sure you've noticed, she finally managed, gesturing to herself. She had no solid way to prove this, but she was convinced that her not belonging must be obvious to those in the mystic arts. Sticking out like a brand, just as it had back in her world. Yes, your voice does have an odd quality to it that seems to transcend this dimension, Strange agreed, hands on his chin. I've never seen anything like it. What was so in your head, Gwen? I've never seen anything like you. Take it as a compliment, Gwen. He meant it as a compliment. It seems to me that there's a strange energy binding you to a 4th level dimension. I can't access those, and they don't mesh well with our world either, Strange hummed, his hands glowing with mystical energy. I'm assuming this displacement is causing you a great level of distress? If this keeps up, you'll probably be sucked back out soon enough. But I suppose that I can find a way to send you back sooner if I... No! She yelped. No, I love being here. Don't send me back. She finally gotten a glimpse of what she could have. A sandbox made especially for her, brought to life by a million creatives. Back home, it was already hard enough. Now that she knew what she could have, she didn't think she could survive without it. Strange expression softened. Okay then, he agreed. What do you want then? Is there any way you can cement me here? She asked, tripping over her words. Like, the other universe is trying to drag me back, right? And this universe is trying to push me out, limiting my options. I don't exist here, and it reminds me at every turn. I can make you an anchor, yes. Strange waved his hands up. It's a simple charm, of course. I take your few innate traits and implant them into the fabric of reality, and the rest of the world will sort itself out. What are your innate traits exactly? Well, Gwen started to say, and then fell silent. When she'd come into the comic book world, she had completely reinvented herself in the hopes of standing out in the comics. And that was who she was. This was who she always wanted to be, because who would judge a pantsless screaming hooligan when there was a walking, talking duck detective? But maybe it was best to start with the basics. My name is Gwen Poole, with an E. I've killed more than a bunch of red shirts, and I am my very own person. And I want to be a superhero. Oh, put that down as your aspiration, Strange muttered, casting a look at one of Bullseye's discarded masks on top of the television. That stung a little, even though it was obviously the truth. Finally, whatever incarnation he was weaving faded away, and he reached forward to poke her on the forehead. Energy sparked through her. It was almost like reality bent around her for a few seconds, and then the bending ceased, and everything settled down around her once more. Well then, Gwen Poole, Strange smiled, offering her a handshake. Welcome to your new Earth. She took the handshake eagerly. Does this mean that I have a social security number? She squealed. This was huge. It could change everything. She might even be able to ditch Lester in his stupid base. Strange looked disconcertedly guilty and not happy. Listen, kid, he breached the topic guiltily. I simply gave you an anchor in this universe, so that thinks you're from a universe that isn't a 4th level dimension. That doesn't mean you existed here before you showed up. I can't fool countless databases and people into thinking you lived a life here. It wasn't fair. Hot, angry tears were brimming up in her eyes. This was meant to be an easy fix. Why wasn't it fixing? You're supposed to be the Sorcerer Supreme, she snapped. If you can't help me fake an identity, who is? Listen, kid. I'm sorry that I can't help you out, Strange shook his head regretfully. But this level of intricate memory magic isn't something I'd risk for the people dearest to me. How about now that you're not in danger of being zapped away at any second, you can look into some other solution? Yeah, okay, Gwen agreed, backing away from him. Wait, hold on. Could you do me another favor? Strange smiled a little indulgently. Of course, Miss Poole. What is it? I have a friend, she explained, badly. Or, well, I had a friend, Cecil. Cecil, I never actually learned his last name. Wow, I'm awful. He's dead now, anyway. My current boss killed him. That's the favor I need to call in. Do you think you could... Consider it done, he agreed. It'll take some time to sort through every dead teenage Cecil, but I can tell you where he died if that helps. Sure, that'll narrow things down, he agreed. You just stay here and keep your head down for a few days, and I'll recover your friend for you, as best as I can. Thanks. Again, she threw out. Just once more. Strange winked at her, and then vanished into mist. Once the uninvited wizard had left, Gwen finished her ramen and rushed through a shower, making sure that she didn't use too much hot water. This was a turning point in her story. Finally, the possibility of breaking free of the miserable life she was stuck in. Bullseye was the anchor in her story. Her connection to the important people and events. Cutting him off was risky. It meant letting go of the possibility of tie-ins and cameos in other comics. Would she be able to make it on her own? Or would she be killed off in the background of some comic Bullseye featured in to make a statement about his cold and unfeeling nature, even extending to his own students? Was she meant to be the lamer, dumber, filler apprentice, meant to contrast the actual apprentice Bullseye would pick up later? Her ego couldn't take a hit like that. No, the narrative had gotten her to this point. This was no reason to fuck it all up, even more by struggling against it. Strange had fixed her little issue with the real world trying to pull her back out, but that didn't mean the narrative couldn't still try to wipe her out anyways. Strange was right. She needed to sit still and keep her head down. By the time Bullseye came back, she was sitting in the storage room, the Gwenpool costume drying by the window, so she had put on a pair of drawers and a sweatshirt as she aimed a hairdryer at her soaking hair. You, he grunted, barging in without a knock. She'd left the door open a crack, but still. Hey, she waved, running a comb through her hair, as another jet of hot air blasted over her. Is something wrong? We've got another job, he explained over the roar of the hairdryer. A guard job this time. Oh, how the tables had turned. Hopefully she wasn't going to be the one killed by a vindictive little monster apprentice. When do we start? She asked, setting the hairdryer aside to comb her hair into place finally. Tomorrow. Some aliens need us to keep their weapons dealing safe, Bullseye explained. There was a slight quirk in his mouth that immediately raised Gwen's suspicions. We're totally stealing a couple of those weapons, aren't we? She clarified. You're stealing a couple of those weapons. I will have nothing to do with this. And if you get caught, I'll be forced to put you down. So don't get caught. She didn't doubt it for a second. The floating base in the middle of the ocean was damp, dreary, and incredibly tense. Gwen held herself straight and stiff and weaved nervously around the crowds and crowds of squid-headed aliens. They didn't seem particularly unwelcoming. In fact, they seemed to think that she was an adorable curiosity, judging by the way they patted her head and cooed. At least it was better than being the people they strapped into chairs and disintegrated for demonstrations to future buyers. She'd take the patronizing head pats any day of the year. Another good thing about now having pants is that she could now sneak one of the handheld vaporizers into her shorts without it being obscenely obvious about what she was doing. It didn't help her with her anxiety when she could feel the cold metal rubbing against her leg every time she moved. But no one around her seemed to notice. Bullseye was clearly recognized as the guy in charge. He was the one who accompanied the dealers to weapons exchanges, and the one who followed the big shots around. Gwen only dawdled in the sidelines, keeping an eye on the perimeter and weapons cache. She didn't exactly see what the point of it all was, since the aliens had some pretty solid security themselves. They seemed almost redundant compared to the scouts and jet skis. A perimeter alarm blared, and the handheld monitor she had been given blared to life. Something had breached after all. Well, fuck her for not thinking this through. She didn't think, just grabbed a couple of laser daggers off the armory wall and ran towards the area where the breach had happened. What lay in front of her was a bloodbath. Squid heads were scattered across the floor, bluish-green blood smeared all over the floor. Their solid, bulky armor had been cleaved right into two, exposing extraterrestrial innards. The guns lay discarded, inches away from their hands and tentacles. They never even got to use them, nor did the killer think to grab the weapons. So, he wasn't here for them. It wasn't her business to care about his motives. It was her job to spot the target and pull the trigger. And bad news for the perp, but he was standing 15 feet away from her, hacking away at another horde of squid aliens. Gwen had to stop herself from scoffing at the ease of which the assassin was destroying the other guards. They're vapor blasters. How were they letting him get close? This just proved the fact that it was the right idea to have an eyesore costume and mask, or else she'd be turned into one of these guys just by the rules of the universe. Ah shit, the guy was getting away, and killing more of the people she was meant to be protecting. Gwen needed to get on that. A hero like Spider-Man would crack a few quips. Maybe try to find common ground with the guy, at least introduce himself before apprehending him. That was what she always expected of a hero. She wasn't a hero, though. She didn't even give the man a warning before she picked out one of the laser blades, lined up with the assassin, who was now fiddling with some sort of computer in the wall. The knife went flying from her hand, twirling blade over hand, while the man continued working on the wiring of the computer. He had taken his helmet off to see the screen better, all the better for the knife to embed himself into the back of his head with a dull thunk. He fell onto his side. Probably never even got a warning before the light left his eyes. Gwen started to creep closer. Not because she wanted to see the corpse up close, but because she had the strong feeling that if she left behind even one laser dazzler, it might push Lester over the edge. That was when the screen caught her attention. There was writing on it that she couldn't understand, the same squiggly alphabet that all the alien languages had in the comics. What she didn't understand was the warning exclamation point with the blinking symbols. The image of the literal explosion on the side was also helpful. It was a timed self-destruct, and she needed to get out of the range immediately. Gwen made a break for the exit to the ocean. There was no blaring sound, but it still felt like she could hear sirens in her head. She had barely heaved the solid steel door open when the explosion rocked the base, sending a wave of hot air and pressure that threw her into the tumultuous waters. She was submerged in rushing heavy water that pressed down on her from all sides, tumbling her around like a sock in a washing machine. Her lungs were being pressed down like water balloons, and she couldn't tell which way was up and down. For a period of time, she almost thought she actually was going to die. Then her head broke through the water, letting air rush into her lungs. The waves spat her out onto the sharp, rocky beach, leaving her curled up, wheezing and puking up water. She just washed that costume too. Wrung out like a used towel, she simply opted to lay there and let the sand and salt dry on her skin until the sun had begun rising. At that point, she finally pulled herself up and peeled the spandex off to replace it with the civvies she had in her bag. She found herself stumbling back into society, where her logs bruised and feeling like her brain cogs were gummed up completely. She was only half aware of the slushy she ended up buying to soothe her overheated brain. Could near drowning cause brain damage? Because she felt like she had brain damage. Hopefully only temporary, comic, convenient brain damage. Lester would be mad at her if she took too long getting back. She needed to make sure he didn't think that she had made a run for it. She might do that later, but not now. It might make him tighten her leash. Another sip of the blue drink. The world rocked underneath her body, thinning her black spots through her vision. Oh, she was on a train. When'd she get on the train? She squinted past the spots in her vision until finally it cleared so that she could get a good look at her fellow passengers. The next station where the train was going to stop. Speaking of passengers, she looked blearily at the boy sitting across from her, who awkwardly avoided her gaze. If she didn't know better, she'd consider him to be the spitting image of... There was a keychain swinging from the zipper of his school bag with his name on it. Holy shit, this couldn't be happening. It was Miles Morales.
So, a lot of changes in this one. I changed up my recording setup pretty drastically by leaving my laptop out of the recording booth, so to say. Like, instead of my closet this time, I also used a thick blanket, but it was 95 degrees outside, so I was basically dying. Even though, in retrospect, it sounds really good. That's why the audio fluctuated so much, by the way. I had to open the blanket, like, sometimes in a couple of sessions to let air in. But, yeah, I might not update as much this summer because of that. Like, do it in winters because then I'm not, like, dying of heat stroke. But anyways, I was also a bit adventurous with my editing. I added effects to show when a character is having a flashback or is panicking. And I added in, like, a staticky noise to work as a line break to, like, break up scenes. And anyways, I have exams now. So I'm not sure when I'll update next. There's one more installment of this left, where I'll do the last half of the fic in one fell swoop. Other than that, there's a cool audio adaptation I want to do of this X-Men movies fic called Searchlight. It's like 13 years old, but I really, really, really love it. And I like want to make sure more people read it. And like with all the stuff I've been hearing about happening on Wattpad with all the new gears coming onto AO3, I'm considering doing a full how to AO3 tutorial. If like that interests anyone. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was fun. And yeah. Like leave your feedback, not because like it helps an algorithm, but because it fills my ego. And okay, now I'm cutting this off.